and utter absence of leadership coming from Tennessee's governor. Pure and simple. We are facing one of the worst economies in a century, and this legislature just spent over $1 million to incarcerate protesters. We have over 200,000 people in our state who are out of work, and this legislature came together this week to extend liability protections knowingly to the worst actors in our society that aren't taking any precautions. People in this state right now, they are struggling with hard times economically. They're trying to get their kids back in school safely. And rather than provide real leadership when it's needed, we have seen the leadership, so-called, of this state surrender meekly to the loudest and most divisive voices in politics instead of stepping up and doing their job.
They talked a lot about they said there was no protest legislation, but anyway, do you feel the protesters, by trying to block legislators in the legislative garage, following people down the street, calling them names, etc., did that give the Republicans ammunition to go ahead and pass this, or were they going to do it regardless?
Look, I mean, I think that this was worked out ahead of time. These felony provisions were crafted in the governor's legislation that was sponsored. I think everybody knew that that legislation was going to move when we got here. Anyone who wants to blame, people who are speaking to their legislators, even if they're doing it rudely, for taking unconstitutional steps to limit protesting, like, that's ridiculous. Nobody's got an obligation to be polite to us as legislators. Like, the capital belongs to the citizens.
And along those same lines, we signed up for this. I was a Senate staffer during the days of the income tax protest, and the protesters then were a whole lot more boisterous and violent as they were throwing rocks through the governor's office window than these folks. But it didn't look like a police state at our Tennessee state capitol as it does now. I mean, this call, the telehealth bill could have been done by executive order until January when we come back. We passed another bill to protect bad actors because they took out any CDC guidelines for standard of care for what people should do to protect customers, employees, the citizens of this state. So they did that to protect bad actors. And in the call was this piece of legislation to, when we have a segment of our society that's calling out for help, please listen to us, give us a seat at the table. We can't breathe. And what was the response of the Tennessee Republican Party? They put a knee on their neck. That's what they did. And I'm embarrassed. I'm ashamed. I mean, my two young children sat down and watched the John Lewis funeral with me. I didn't ask them to. They sat down and wanted to. And they watched what a true hero was. If these people would have been in the Tennessee General Assembly in the 50s and 60s, John Lewis may still be alive in the Tennessee Penitentiary right now. It's shameful what we did tonight.
Senator Akbari, you said that you felt that the felony charge was ridiculous, but the big argument was that they don't want to see what happened in Portland and Seattle to happen here. Can you respond to that?
I mean, I certainly can. I think that Tennessee, one, a government has the right, as they did in Portland to decide what sort of parameters they want to create for their city, okay? The local government does. I think what we did here today was, again, try and take away power from our local governments by saying that if they make a decision based on what they think is best as far as law enforcement in the area that they have control over, they potentially could be held financially liable. I think that when the rhetoric that was thrown out by our colleagues across the aisle to justify camping out as a felony, it was just ludicrous, right? So there are no revolutionaries outside. There's no one trying to burn down the Capitol or the way that we do government here. They're simply asking to have a meeting with folks who are elected to represent them. So I thought it was absurd. I just couldn't, I mean, y'all know me, okay? I'm always gonna try and find some sort of compromise or some sort of positive in it. I could not do that with this legislation. It was mean-spirited, it was unnecessary, it was completely anti to whatever rhetoric they say around criminal justice reform. You are going to saddle someone with a felony simply for demanding that their voice is heard. We're not talking about violent folks. That is already a crime. It is. We're talking about people who have canopies up in the hot sun, who are protesting and having their voice heard. That's it. And now they potentially could be a felon, taking away their right to vote, taking away their right to own a gun, taking away their right to get financial aid. It's absolutely ridiculous.
And I agree with everything said. And all I can think about is the fact that we were here in a pandemic when almost 1,300 lives have been lost in Tennessee, the missed opportunity of doing things that really benefited Tennessee's working families, like expanding Medicaid to make sure everybody has access to care, make sure that our hospitals stay intact as we so desperately need them as cases are creeping up in our rural areas, to make sure that our schools are gonna be safe. I'm hearing a lot of back and forth. Knox County was ready to go in. Sounds like Knox County might pull back now. What are we doing to help schools be ready with what they need? We didn't do a thing about that. Did we talk about anything to do to contain this virus? We absolutely did not. And if those are not the things we come back to talk about what needs to happen in Tennessee right now, it's a huge disservice to every hardworking Tennessean. And we should not be adding to misery by putting knees on necks and penalizing those folks who are doing right and rewarding bad actors. It just doesn't make sense. It makes no sense that we came back in a pandemic and that is the legislation that was passed.
It's like they're legislating in the Twilight Zone. It's some alternate form of reality. I don't get it.
We're 11th in the nation in the number of cases in this country. And the only reason we need a liability bill is a lack of leadership from the first floor, not doing proper testing, contact tracing, and getting this pandemic
And no
under
mask mandate.
And no mask mandate, exactly. You know, I'm sitting in there with 99 members and 20-something of us are wearing a mask because half of them still think it's a hoax. You know, how many Tennesseans have to die before these people react and do something? It's a pure lack of leadership, and it starts on the first floor.
But isn't the state in Tennessee leading among the leaders of the nation in testing?
Well,
No.
but if you test and you don't get a result for 7-8 days, you might as well not have tested anyway. And if you're going to test and tell someone they're positive and you're not going to contact trace and see where they've spread it, you don't need to test anyway either. You know, July 14th was the first time the Tennessee Department of Health put out any advertisement to hire anybody to help with contact tracing in this state. July 14th. This pandemic started in Tennessee in March. You know, a little slow to react.
So where do you all go from here? I mean, special session's over, we're still in a pandemic, what can you all do?
Well, look, I think if you are a normal human being in Tennessee right now, you're trying to deal with what's going to happen with my job, what's going to happen with my kid's school, Like, if you're out of work, you're trying to figure out why it still takes 2 months to get unemployment. And you're going to look up and see that the legislature came here to do this? Really? I mean, I just think that it demonstrates a deep disconnect with the real life concerns of people across the state. And, you know, I think we're going to continue to focus on the things that matter, keep trying to push an agenda that actually concerns people's livelihoods and the lives of their families. And I think that the sort of wild overreach that we saw this week, I don't think, maybe it helps you with people that are connected 24/7 to Fox News, but I don't think it actually helps you with the real world. And I think that we've got to, I think people need to hear from their legislators that they expect more. Because I think that what happened in the last, 72 hours in this chamber is as embarrassing and as shameful as any period in quite some time.
Representative Johnson or Mitchell, when the Ron Travis Expand Medicaid bill was killed, it was done so under the arrangement that House Speaker Sexton was going to have summer slate or have a conversation over the summer. To your knowledge, has any of that begun? Has that started?
To my knowledge, no.
Not at all.
What would you like to see happen?
An actual study, to look at the studies that have been done in the states that have already expanded and the great success every single one of those states has happened.
We don't have to study. We know it's working in 38 states across the country and the District of Columbia. What is there to study? We know Tennessee tax dollars are subsidizing other states' people getting health care insurance. So, I believe in the citizens of Tennessee. I think, they're finally going to look at what leadership is providing them. And right now, it's unemployment. They're providing them children who can't go to school because they're lacking leadership, doing nothing in a pandemic. They're seeing their grandparents die with nothing being done. I mean, what else do they have to do for people to say, hey, maybe I need to change the way I'm voting. Maybe I need to show up to vote because what they're giving me is not working. They can't even get unemployment right. They've made me unemployed because they won't do anything about a pandemic, and they can't even get my unemployment correct.
And so what I'm dealing with now, we've got an uptick in unemployment with Knoxville. Some of the big employers have laid folks off, and so a huge uptick in the uninsured because of the length of time that they have lost their jobs. And so these programs are just, it's ballooning one right after the other. And now we've got the issue of evictions and those things, and we didn't deal with any of those things, and people are hurting.
I think the point that Gloria just raised is maybe the most important one. The federal unemployment supplements have run out. A lot of the eviction protections are going away. The economy is still in a crisis, and we basically have a ticking time bomb that could really go off and do real damage to people who have, had steady jobs for years, who've been business owners for generations. And rather than actually do something that might have helped those people probably in our last opportunity before the fall hits, we came here and did some partisan nonsense. And I don't think there's any way to look at what happened this week as anything other than that.
Over 70 Tennesseans died while we were in special session from COVID-19. These people did not even mention COVID-19. If you did mention it, they gavelled you down and told you were off topic. They don't care. The people of Tennessee have to see that and understand that. Over 70 lives were lost. and they're worried about some young people who are across the street in a tent. It's ridiculous.
All right, guys.
Thanks, y'all.